As we get into our time in the Word today, we're going to begin in verse number 7. And this church, we've looked at 5 of them so far. All of these churches in Revelation, all of these letters are written, they're given from Jesus via a revelation, a revealing to John, who is a follower of Jesus. In fact, John is the one that the Gospel of John is named after, if you're familiar with that book. He was one of the 12 that followed Jesus for 3 years. And then as you fast forward here to Revelation, this is decades later. John is no longer a young man. In fact, now he's a senior citizen. And John is studying, and John is on this island of Patmos, this exiled place, and God reveals himself, Jesus reveals himself to John. And then he says, write to these churches, and he begins to have John record and write to 7 churches, this being the 6th of those 7. All 7 of these churches are located in the peninsula today that we call Turkey, or in this context, it was Asia or Asia Minor. And so as we look at the church today is the church of Philadelphia. This is the home of the Eagles, the Liberty Bell, cheesesteak. Anybody hungry yet? You see, today when we think of as Americans, we think of Philadelphia. We think of a city in Pennsylvania. But you know what? It was actually named after this city that existed centuries, millennia ago, and still populated today, although it goes by a different name. But Philadelphia literally translates to this, and maybe you learned it in your U.S. history classes in high school or something like that. Philadelphia means the city of brotherly love. And so this city existed 2,000 years ago. It was part of the Roman Empire there in Asia Minor. And the original Philadelphia was not known for American football. It was way before that. Was not known for a cracked bell, way before that. I can't tell you if there was cheesesteak or not. But it was known for its vineyards. This area, this part of Asia Minor, known for its vineyards. In fact, it rivaled Rome as the primary source of all types of vineyards. So whether you're looking for grapes to wine and everything in between, this was one of the places, just a hotbed for the production. This not only was known for its vineyards, but Philadelphia, like many of these important cities of its day, was a fortified city. Philadelphia had walls that surrounded and that encased the downtown area, the central district of Philadelphia, which seems like a good thing. But actually, one of the things that's kind of fascinating about Philadelphia among all of the cities we've looked at is that right there near Philadelphia, this region is known for significant earthquakes. And the way that Philadelphia was built was such that when these earthquakes began to rumble a little bit, the buildings in Philadelphia multiple times collapsed. And so over and over and over again, this was a city that had to be rebuilt. In fact, at one point, it was so demolished that the Roman government said, hey, Philadelphia, for right now, you do not have to send tribute or taxes to Rome because you need to use those funds to rebuild. And so they stimulated their economy by exempting them from taxes because the destruction was so severe. And so it got to the point that if you lived in Philadelphia, it was like living in a modern city today. Many times the people who live in a certain city live outside of that city. And so they moved from Philadelphia into the surrounding areas. They would go into the city when they needed to. But if you lived in the city or you were in the city and you began to feel the slightest tremor, you were getting out of the city very quickly. The city of Philadelphia was a city that had walked through and been through many of these ups and downs, had great economic opportunity, but also some incredible devastation. For Christians living in Philadelphia, we're going to see a little bit here in a moment, but for Christians living in Philadelphia, there's a lot of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty. If you lived in Philadelphia and you were a follower of Jesus Christ, many believers in Jesus were still a part of, for the first century of Christianity, were still a part of what's called the synagogue. This was a place where Judaism was discussed and taught, and those who practiced the Jewish faith were able to gather together and worship. For the early years of Christianity, Christians were viewed as being part of this Jewish faith. And so what began to happen, though, over the empire is that certain cities and certain synagogues began to push out those Christians. Philadelphia is one such city. By the time they're receiving this letter from Jesus through John, now they have been put out of their synagogue. They no longer have a place to worship. Likely they're meeting in a home or in some kind of a public space, but they're no longer welcome or affiliated with the Jews in the city. But not only does it mean that, but it actually means a little bit more than that. If you've been with us, we've talked about this a couple of times, because what this means is not only were these Christians put out of the synagogue, the place of worship, but in fact, they were also put out of society. In this era, it was required that members of the Roman Empire worship the emperor. It was viewed as blasphemy and viewed as even a sedition to not worship the emperor in Rome. And so these individuals are now, if you say, I cannot bow my knee to the emperor, there are severe consequences. You're a traitor to the nation. And there were some exemptions that were made, one significant one being for the Jews. As Rome came into Judea, the Judeans, the followers of God's law, those ones who have traced their ancestry back to Moses and to Abraham, they were told by God, you cannot worship any other God. And so when the Romans came in, they said, we are devoted to our singular God. We cannot worship any other. And they made an allowance for the Jews. And so for the first decades of Christianity, the Christians were able to worship within the Roman Empire because the Romans just kind of looked at them and said, you guys are basically Jews. You guys just figure your stuff out. But now as the Jews began to push out the Christians found themselves without that sanctuary. And so now they were rejecting the worship of Rome and the emperors, and they were rejecting the Jewish without Jesus version of their faith. And so we find them in this no man's land where culture has pushed them aside. They're no longer welcome in these places. And so this group has become an outcast. This church in Philadelphia, there is not any correspondence that we have throughout the New Testament. We've read some of churches, like the church in Ephesus. There's an entire letter in the New Testament written to these people. But this church in Philadelphia, we don't know a whole lot about except for what we see here. But one of the things that I think is really interesting, as we go through these letters week by week, one of the themes that we've picked up on is that over and over and over again, there's correction given. And so Jesus says, hey, church, this is who I am, and this is how you ought to respond. And over and over again, he's getting on to the church and saying, you're not listening, you're not doing this, you ought to be blank. Well, there are two churches that as Jesus speaks to them, he gives no correction. And Philadelphia is one of those churches. But Philadelphia is not the largest church that John is writing to. Probably that was Ephesus. It was not the wealthiest church. Again, likely Ephesus, maybe Laodicea that we'll see next week. But it's not Philadelphia for sure. They were not known for any extravagance, for anything significant. This was not a group of people that you would look at them and be like, wow, they are something special. But yet, as Jesus writes, he has no correction that he gives to them. And so perhaps we could say it this way. Perhaps this is the church of the seven, at least one of the two, most like Jesus. And so as we dig into seeing what Jesus has to say to this church, I want to remind us, we often like to consider ourselves strong or empowered. How many of you like to tell people how weak you are, how incapable you are? We do that when we want to get out of doing work? Like, nope, you don't want me for that. But we like to give off the appearance of having ability or having strength or having knowledge or understanding. If someone were to walk around and call you dumb and incapable and untalented and weak, you would be like, ouch, that hurts. That's not how we want to think of ourselves. Yet here we find this church in Philadelphia that is defined by their lack of strength, as we're going to see in a moment. They have little power, is how Jesus says it. Outcasts and far from society. Here's, as we just begin, here's kind of the thing I want you to keep in your mind. God does his best work through our weakness. You follow me? God does his best work through our weakness. Oftentimes, we want to come to God and we want to say, here's the strength, here's what I'm capable of, here's what I can do. But often, God does his best work in the middle of weak people. As we get into this letter, I want to begin with who Jesus introduces himself as. We see this in verse number 7. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one will open. And so even at this very beginning, Jesus, he introduces himself. He uses two phrases, two words here to describe himself. He says, I am the Holy One and I am the True One. As we look at this declaration of holiness, holiness simply kind of means this: otherness, separateness. How God is different than you and I. Hosea chapter 11, verse number 9, if you go back to this Old Testament prophet, God is speaking through Hosea, and God speaks and says, I am God. I'm not a man. And even as he uses this word holy here in this passage in Hosea, he's talking about that separateness between God and us, and how he is God and you and I are not. But that's good news for us. And so now God is using this, Jesus is using this term of holiness to describe himself. But not only is he holy and other, not only is he separate from us, but also at the same time, he is true. Or we could say it this way: he is trustworthy. He's reliable in every conceivable way, in word and in action. And so we see Jesus as he presents himself. He says, hey, Philadelphian church, I am the holy God. I am the true God. I am the one that both has the ability and is trustworthy. But it doesn't stop there. He also describes himself as what? The one who has the key of David. Everyone got that? Clear? What does it mean that he has the key of David? What is he even speaking of here? Well, this is the same David that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, the great king of Israel. And in fact, this phrase, if you remember, if you were with us back, we're looking at like 8 weeks now. When we began this study of Revelation, I said, hey, church, if you're going to read the book of Revelation, you need to also study and also read what? What did I tell you? The Old Testament. The Old Testament. If someone says, hey, come study Revelation with me, and you need to ask this question, do I need my Old Testament? If they say no, find literally anything else and do that instead, because it will not be worth your time. You'll be all kinds of directions, because Old Testament is necessary for understanding of Revelation. This phrase is one of those phrases. As we look at the key of David, we look around and we say, okay, what is that even talking about? But it's not the first time it's found in the Bible. Isaiah 22, and you guys were all thinking Isaiah 22, right? Neither was I, it's okay. Isaiah 22. In Isaiah 22, there is this unfaithful, it'd be kind of the modern equivalent of like the Secretary of State by the name of Shebna. And God comes in, and this man is unfaithful. God removes him from this position and replaces him with a faithful man by the name of Eliakim. Okay, it's going to be significant in a second. He says here, Now, speaking of faithful Eliakim and unfaithful Shebna, he says that he will open and close doors for these men using the key of David. And so in this statement, what is he talking about? You have an unfaithful man, Shebna. You have a faithful man, Eliakim. And here God is saying, okay, Shebna, I'm removing you. Eliakim, I am placing you here. And all of this is taking place with the key of David. This authority that is being given to the one who is faithful and removed from the one who is unfaithful. Store that in your brain somewhere, okay? Watch as Jesus begins to speak to this church directly. What is he saying? What is his message to this church? He says at the end of verse number 7, the key of David, who opens and no one will shut. I am the one who shuts and no one opens. And so he's speaking of this ability to make and impose changes that no one is able to supersede or overcome. Verse 8, I know your works. Behold, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and not denied my name. And so in front of this church in Philadelphia, what is he placing? He's placing what he calls an open door. Now, why is he putting an open door in front of the church in Philadelphia? He doesn't give this promise to the church in Ephesus. In fact, the church of Ephesus, he says, hey, get your act together or I'm going to come and I'm going to shut down this church. Now to Philadelphia, he says, hey, I put in front of you an open door. Was it because they had power and ability? Was it because they had great strength and wisdom and knowledge? Was it because they had resources and wealth? No. Why is he giving this to this church in Philadelphia? What does he say? I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. Why is he putting this open door in front of this church in Philadelphia? Because this church in Philadelphia was faithful to the things that Jesus had already given to them. This church had endured difficulty, endured persecution, endured being put out of the synagogue, as we're going to see in just a moment. And the fact is that God doesn't delight just in using people that have great ability. In fact, as God works, when we use our strength, who gets the glory for that? When we use our ability, who gets the praise? Oftentimes, if we're not careful, we want that. Doesn't it feel good when someone says, oh, wow, you did such a great job. Oh, wow, it's incredible you blank. Doesn't that feel good to get that affirmation? Puts a little smile on our face. And listen, we ought to encourage one another, okay? So before you run away and say, I'm never going to say anything nice to anyone ever again, listen, some of you guys are just good at that already. Stop, okay? That's not okay. But what we see is oftentimes when we're doing it just in our own strength, I mean, good night, come on. We can rob God of the glory that belongs to him. Because can I point something out to you? Who gave you the ability that you have? Before you were born, did you just get handed a sheet and say, oh, I want to check all the boxes so that I can have intellect, or I can have skill, or I can have opportunity? Was it your decision? Who gave you the gifts that you have today? God did. So who deserves the praise for the way that you use those gifts? But you know what's really incredible is that when God works through weakness, when God takes a church like the church in Philadelphia and builds a city that is faithful to the gospel for hundreds of years, even while the other cities around walk away from Christian faith and are overcome, this church didn't do that because there was such a great foundation and so much wealth or so much political influence or so much ability. It did it because God did it. And in the middle of this city, we have no choice but to look and say, God, the glory belongs to you. because on paper, this should never have happened. Listen, mathematically speaking, the odds are against them. But God, we insert him into this situation, and he alone receives the glory. Watch with me in verse number 9. Jesus continues to speak. He says, behold, watch this. He says, behold, that's what that means. I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, watch this. I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you, because you have kept my word about patient endurance. And so he sets this open door, and then he goes and he begins to speak of the synagogue of Satan. This is the second time that actually we see this in the book of Revelation. The first time being in chapter number 2, verse number 9. We see that there is this group that he calls the synagogue of Satan there in Smyrna, another city there that is praised for the work that they are doing in the midst of difficulty. And so now we see this group once again being called Jews who are not. So why are they calling themselves Jews? Why are they worshiping in the synagogue? Why are they borrowing this title, utilizing this title? Well, there was probably some ethnicity. They're probably Jewish in their nationality or their birth. But more significantly, these Jews claimed to follow the law. But if they did, they would have followed Jesus. You see, the law exists, Paul writes this in Galatians, to point us to Jesus. The law is like a schoolmaster or a tutor who comes along and demonstrates for us our need for something greater. Because when we line ourselves up against the law, you know what we find? We find our imperfections. When God says, this is my standard of holiness, and we put ourselves there, we understand that we don't measure up. We don't get there. But then Jesus comes into the picture, and he says, oh, you don't have to, because I did for you. And then he says, John chapter 3, verse number 16, whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. And so Jesus enters in and he says, this is my holiness and I'm giving it to you. My righteousness, this is yours. And he takes our sin and goes to the cross with it. But these Jews claim to follow the law. But if they did, they would have seen Jesus in this. Jesus himself says to the leaders during his time, the religious leaders during his time on earth, he says this, search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life. What's that phrase? You think you have eternal life. You convinced yourself of something that is not true. And for these Jews in Philadelphia, instead of following Jesus, they persecuted those who followed after him. But that wasn't the end of the story. Because Jesus promises what? That they will bow before your feet. There's going to be a day, he says, that these who are far away from me, one day they will learn that I have loved you. You are the ones who are following after the things that I have said. You are my people. They think themselves to be following after me, but yet they are wandering away. And then now he says, there will be a day that they will learn that you are my people. And the fact is there will be a day that every person, great, small, believing, unbelieving, will confess the name of Jesus. There will be a day that everyone who has ever been born will say, Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. But here's the difference. Some will do so joyfully. There will be those who we follow Jesus and we say, yes, Jesus is Lord. He has made himself apparent. He has showed himself. And there will be those who remorsefully will come to an understanding that they have not believed and not followed after the Savior that was given for them. That they have rejected Christ. Because you see, even John chapter 3, verse number 16, this verse that's so well known, and that you see the signs held up at football games in the New Philadelphia, right? And then it says, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Oh, feels good. That whosoever believes in him should not perish, should not be condemned. They won't be the ones who are mourning on this day as they confess Jesus' name. But he continues. He says, there are those that are condemned already because they haven't believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Heartbreaking. So there are those that will one day understand who Jesus is. But by that time, it'll be too late. They'll have rejected the gift that God so freely offered through Jesus. And so Jesus here is speaking to this church and he's saying, hey, listen, church. These people who are today persecuting you, today they are trying to silence you. They're putting you out of the synagogue and they're locking the door so you can't come in. Don't worry, I'm opening up a different door. And one day they will realize the truth that you now understand and follow. And so Jesus is speaking all of these things, but not only that, watch what is coming here. This is a really interesting statement from Jesus. Aligns a lot with a passage that we studied several months ago, Matthew chapter 24. Verse number 10, he says, because you have kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world, to try those who dwell on the earth. He continues, I'm coming soon. Hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. There's a lot taking place in those verses, and I want to give a little bit, kind of an overview of it. I just want to break down these pieces that we see here. Jesus now says, I will keep you from the hour of trials to come. And who is that promise given to? It's given to the ones that keep his word and endure. So it's given to the ones that both proclaim Jesus and continue to follow after him. To these people, he says that he's going to keep them from the hour of trials. And so here Jesus is making an assumption, right? He's not spelling out everything that this is going to look like, but what is he saying? He's saying there is an hour of trials that will come. Can we all agree on that? We all see that, right? There's an hour of trials to come. Now, do we have all of the details filled in? Does he give us all the dots and all the points? No, we see a phrase, hour of trials. Not just a trial to come, but that phrase hour is speaking of a time that these trials will present themselves. Matthew chapter 24, Jesus tells us of what he calls in that passage. He says there's a great tribulation, the like of which has never been seen before. And when we looked at Matthew 24, we talked about birthing pains. One of the incredible things about childbirth, if you or you and your spouse have gone through this process, if you've witnessed the hours leading up to childbirth, there was never a time, hopefully, in that moment, that as they were going through the labor and the contractions began to come, that you realistically said, you know what, I don't think this baby's coming. Let's just pack up and go home. I mean, some of you, I know, I've heard stories of those who have endured hours and hours and hours of labor. At what point do you just tap out, right? Yeah, we're just going to leave. We'll come back later. The husband might say that. The wife is going to say, what are you talking about? What is wrong with you? But what we see is consistently there's this pattern. The contractions, as we get closer to this birth, the contractions become closer together, more frequent, and more intense. You can watch it on the charts, right? You can see it kind of coming as they're measuring the impulses from the body. It's really incredible just to be able to see that and understand it's moving and moving and moving to be closer to. And so what we see here is that we see that there is a time that is coming. But at the same time, we endure trials and tribulations even now, leading up to something here that Jesus calls an hour of trials to come on all the earth. And even as he promises, this is one thing that I think is fascinating and encourage you to study out. We want to continue. We got a lot to cover still. But what you see is he says this: I will keep you from the hour of trial coming on the whole world to try those who dwell on the earth. And so a day will come when God's wrath is poured out on the earth, specifically on those who do not believe. And Revelation seems to indicate that at least to some degree, the believers will not be affected, will not be potentially present during this time as this promise is kept, as they are kept, not merely from the trials, but from the hour of trials that are coming. Then he gives this statement. And I think this is where his emphasis is in this passage. I am coming soon. I am coming soon. Sometimes, like when these really short sentences are just like put out there, we have to pay attention, right? This part is very clear, isn't it? I am coming soon. Now, this letter, Revelation, our best understanding is that this was written in about 60 to 70 years after Jesus died. So this is the year 80, 90, like 100, around the turn of the first century. This letter was written. And so today, you might look at this and we might ask the question when we say, he's coming soon. He makes this promise, I'm coming soon. And we just said that he was true. You might be asking the question, is he? Is he? It's been 1900 years. Is he coming soon? I love all of the scripture. I love Peter. Peter's this guy in the New Testament that he just says what he's thinking. A lot of times, especially while he was following after Jesus, while Jesus was on the earth, he was really known for saying a lot of dumb stuff. I think I just relate to that. But later he writes 1st and 2nd Peter, these great letters to early Christians. As he's writing, he says this. Let's remember, he's talking to those who are saying, oh, Jesus isn't really coming soon. He says, hey, time out. Let's remember. To the Lord, 1,000 years is a day. And a day is like 1,000 years. And so I just want you to think about this for a second. Assuming that Peter wrote this about 30 years after Jesus. So most people think that he wrote this about 30 years after Jesus' death, burial, resurrection. If that's true, you know how long Peter had been waiting just based on that math, and it's hyperbole, I know. Based on that math, you know how long he'd been waiting? 45 minutes. How many of you, your kids, if they have to wait for 45 minutes, man, you think they're dying? What? 45 whole minutes? And so there were those in Peter's day that were saying, I don't know if Jesus is actually going to come back. And Peter's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You've been waiting for 45 minutes, and you're saying he's not coming back. What is wrong with you? It's not even been an hour, he says. Calm down. For you and I, now we're centuries, millennia later. What does that equate to for us? About 2 days. Can I say this? If you're sitting here going, man, I don't know if he's ever going to, calm down. It's been 2 days. Give him a minute. Because the fact is that Jesus, even as he speaks, he says, I don't know the hour. Only the Father in heaven does. But what does he promise? I am coming. I am coming. I am coming. And the hour is a lot less important. So many times, listen, so many times there are people that want to put a date and they want to say, this is when Jesus is going to return for his people. And they're trying to prophesy and speak into existence. And they're trying to, listen, the timing from our end matters a lot less than the fact that it's true. See, just like a child and you say, hey, no, it's going to be a few minutes. My daughter the other day, she said, But Dad, how long is a few? I mean, she's like weeping. How long is a few? And I'm like, I don't know. We were waiting on something else. And so you know how it is as adults. You're waiting for this thing to happen so that you can do the other thing. And you're like, yeah, just give me a few minutes. How long is a few, Dad? I've been waiting. What did they say? Forever. Calm down. Because we are going to go. I'm going to keep my promise. And if I'm going to keep the promise that I make to my children, how much more is God going to keep the promise that he makes to his children? So is Jesus coming soon? Yes. What does soon mean? Soon, I don't know. But the fact is he's going to come. So for you and me, what does that mean? That means that he could come before you have lunch today. He could come before you lay your head down on your pillow tonight. Or he may not come within your lifetime or your kids or your grandkids. Does any of that change how true the statement is that Jesus is making? Absolutely not. But what does he say? He says, I'm coming. So you know what your responsibility and my responsibility is? It's not to try to figure out when he's coming so that when he's pulling in the driveway, we can act like we were busy the whole time, right? None of you guys did that as teenagers. Your parents asked you to get things done around the house. No, not you. Other people, not you. No. We work like he's coming today. We work like the time is gone and we don't have any other chance. But yet we wait and we endure as if we might not see that until generations have passed after us. That's why we plant seeds for trees that we will never eat the fruit of. We go and we share the gospel with those who we will never actually witness coming to Christ. We go and we do the things that are right to do. Why? Because they're right to do and we're told to do them. Not because we're the ones who are going to be the beneficiaries of it. And so both of these things we have to hold in tension, but we have to hold on to. The fact that he is coming soon, and yet we don't know when soon is. But what does he call us to do in the middle of this? Because he's coming soon. Verse 11, hold fast what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. The one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. And so here in verse number 11, he says, hold fast that no one may seize your crown. We don't know exactly what that crown is. There's a crown of life that's spoken about earlier for those who remain faithful to another church. And so I think that's likely what he's speaking of, but regardless, he's speaking of this treasure that awaits, this recognition, this thing that awaits those who have been faithful to Jesus, faithful to the message of the gospel. And to this, he says, hold fast. I love that term, hold fast. In fact, that's a term that was often used nautically. They would use this term, hold fast. And in fact, even still today, some sailors, some just the salty dog kind of guys, you can find tattoos. They've tattooed hold fast across their knuckles, reminding them of what? When the winds are blowing, when the storm is tossing you, when things are going out of control, that is the most important time for you to hold on. See, when the sea is calm, you can tie it off and you can let it go. When the sea is calm, you're not worried about capsizing. You're not worried about being blown off course. But when seas are good, great. But when things begin to pick up, it requires us to hold fast, to hold with intentionality. Not just hold on, but hold fast, meaning secured, safe, those things that have been entrusted to us. And so we see here that he's telling us, hold on, hold on. And why can we hold on? Well, we can hold on because who is he? He's holy. So he knows and he's able and he is true. He will keep his promise. He always has and he always will. And so church, remember this today. God knows he's able and he always keeps his promises. So hold on. Hold on. There will be those days that you feel like you can't hold on any longer. There will be those days that just feels like your grip on what's going on. You're being stretched and pulled. Don't let go. Don't give up. Don't walk away. Because you see, one of the things about storms that I think is universally true, storms don't last forever. But you know who does? Jesus does. The same yesterday, today, and forever, in fact. And so as we hold fast knowing that there is one who is true and one who is holy, who is still with us. And then watch what he says in verse 12. To the one who conquers, the one who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of a city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, in my own new name. I want to break this down. I want you to see what he's promising here. He says, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. By the time this is being written, the temple is no more. The temple's been destroyed by the Romans, AD 70, so about 20 years before this. In fact, there would have been individuals reading this who had never in their lives not only never seen the temple, but the temple wasn't even a structure by the time they were born. Rome sacked and demolished much of Jerusalem, and the temple was just destroyed, demolished. And today it's in that state even now. And so even now, in this era, as the Jews were worshiping, where did they worship? They worshiped in the synagogue. But the synagogue and the temple were not the same thing. The temple was, and the synagogue was where we went to learn about the things of the temple. We went to learn about those things that were fulfilled there, and the sacrifices and the rituals and the promises that were embodied in this temple. The temple was the dwelling place of God, the holy of holies, where the high priest would go in. Those things didn't happen in the synagogue. They happened in the temple. But even now, as he's making this promise, he says this. He says, I will make you a pillar, not in the synagogue, but in the temple of my God. And what is a pillar? A pillar is something that it's a permanent part of the fixture, isn't it? You couldn't just go into these buildings and be like, hey, you know what? I want to remove this pillar. You watch those home improvement shows and they're like, oh, there's a load-bearing wall. A pillar is a load-bearing pillar, okay? You don't just go in and rip the thing out. It is a part of this structure. And so what is he doing? He's saying, I'm adding you to this. If you keep this, you continue, you conquer, you overcome, you follow me, I will make you a pillar in the temple. You know what that embodies and it signifies? It signifies the endurance that he is giving to this church in Philadelphia. He says, you're going to be able to continue. You're going to be able to keep going. You're going to be a pillar of the things that God is trying to do. But not only that, watch this. I love what he says here. Never shall he go out of it. And this is from a people that have just been, what happened to them in the synagogues? They're shoved out of it. They're removed. They're kicked to the curb. But he says, no, not so in my temple. You will never go out of it. Not only that, but I will write on him the name of my God and the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. You see, as he writes the name of the city, as he writes the name of God, there is a certain promise here of not only, especially when it refers to the city, not only that stability, but now he's also speaking of the protection that comes with it. You see, if you were a part of a city, if you were a citizen of a city, you fell under the protection of that city, the authority of that place. And so when he says that city, that new Jerusalem that is coming, which, by the way, read Revelation, the last couple chapters, and you'll see all about that new Jerusalem, this future event that will take place. What a beautiful thing it will be. But he says this. He says, I'm going to write my name. I'm going to write the name of this new Jerusalem on you as a pillar. You're mine. You belong to me. I'm going to write not only the name of the city, but the name of my God and my own new name. In this era especially, a name, even as we look at the name of a city, but a name really signifies the power or the authority that is taking place, that is being given and spoken of. And so even now, as he writes this and he says, hey, listen, I'm going to write the name of my city. I'm going to write my own name on you. He's saying, you belong to me. But not only that, he's saying that I'm going to protect and I'm going to empower you to the things that I have called you to. So understand this, church. To those who belong to Jesus, God protects and he empowers his people. See, even as we walk through our day-to-day life following after Jesus, the things that come into your life, they've been allowed by God to come into your life. The difficult situations, you say, man, I would just change all of this. I don't want to deal with X, Y, or Z. I don't want to have to put up with. I don't want to have to endure. I want the easy life. God has allowed in your life the things that you are walking through right now. And you see, if God is all-knowing, if he's all-powerful, he could have changed it. And yet, here you are, walking through the spaces that you are. Why? Because God has allowed it to take place in your life. God has given the permission of these things to come in to you. And so the decisions that you're facing, the hardships, the headaches, the things that keep you up at night. See, God knows, God sees, but he also protects and he empowers. In fact, scriptures tell us there's no temptation taking you, but that which is common to man. And with the temptation, he also provides a way of escape. That word temptation can mean a couple different things. First of all, it can mean a pull to sin, a pull to stop following after God, to give ourselves over to whatever these temptations are that are fighting for our affections and our attentions. And so I don't know what struggles you have in your life, what idols, what sins, what desires you're battling and you're wrestling with. But here's what I do know. I do know that God has given you the ability, the power to overcome those things through Jesus Christ. He's given you the ability to have victory over sin. Does that mean you're never going to sin again? That's not what I'm saying, trust me. What I am saying is this. He wants you to be able to overcome and have strength in these spaces. Maybe you're walking through a difficult time of life. You don't have the answers. You don't know what's going to go on. Can I say this? Neither do I. You say, but I really hope it happens this way. Great. I can't make any promises there. I can't promise you that God is going to deliver you from the trial and the difficulty. But I can tell you this. He'll deliver you through it. You say, what if it takes me to the end of myself? What if I don't even survive the thing? Can I tell you this? There's a greater future waiting for us. And so even if in this life we never see the fulfillment of that, there's a greater life that's yet to come. And in that, we can have hope. We can have strength. And as we look at the permanence of that pillar that he promises to make these people in the Philadelphian church, you think he's talking of an earthly thing? No, he's talking about something that's going to outlast anything that you and I have ever seen. This kingdom that Jesus is building, that God will one day bring to bear on this earth. And so today, as we say, God has given and he wants to empower his people. Question for you is this: are you his? Are you his? Maybe you're sitting in this room today and you've never placed your faith in Jesus. We talk about all these promises. Maybe that's new to you because you're not a follower of his. If you are his, whose power are you living in? Are you living in your own ability? What would have happened if the Philadelphian church tried to do that? Man, they would have failed miserably. And so will you. Because the fact is that the only way that we can overcome the obstacles that are placed in front of us is through the power of Jesus Christ.